The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
Matt, I think it's time for me to turn this over to you, but I can't do that without first just waving a very quick hello to Section Chief Mike Harrington, who's joining us from the FBI. I just want to let people know, part of the way the SIG works is the principals that are on the website at cyberinitiativesgroup.com get together once a quarter. We don't wait every year to talk about these issues. Those are the people who set the agenda for the things that we're going to be talking about for these sessions that we do. And overwhelmingly, at the last conversation, people were focused on cybercrime and global cybercrime. So Matt and I couldn't imagine anyone better to talk about that than the FBI. So I'm going to stop talking, turn it over to the real professionals here, and I'll be back with you after. Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you. It's my pleasure now to welcome FBI Section Chief Mike Harrington to give us an idea of what the Bureau is seeing when it comes to global cybercrime. Welcome, Mike. I think we're going to work this kind of like a fireside chat. So great to have your bio on the screen now so everybody gets oriented to you here. I think the topic of the day when it comes to the FBI is ransomware. And we've heard that through our presenters all throughout the morning, some of the challenges with ransomware. And just to jump right in with 2 feet, how would you describe or give us kind of paint a picture of how the FBI is approaching kind of the defense and activities around ransomware?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for the intro. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure.
5 by 5.
All right. Great. So first of all, thanks to SIG for having me. Really happy to be here. I've heard some of the discussions this morning and a lot of great topics being covered. But like you both said, this is a really important topic. Cybercrime is kind of interwoven into everything that we talk about, and so I kind of want to first focus on the threat of ransomware, which I think is the thing that comes top of mind when people think of cybercrime. Is probably the most significant threat. So ransomware actors have evolved over time, but really their modem remains the same, which is to maximize their profit by crippling victims, or in some cases holding their information hostage and threatening to release it, to extract profit out of them. So they're typically less often perpetrated by a single criminal, but really are part of a complex cybercriminal ecosystem in which there are really large and sophisticated organizations playing in that, as well as a lot of interplay among key roles such as developers, affiliates. Many people are familiar with the affiliate model, where the developers will produce the ransomware, but then will outsource the actual exploitation to other people and share the profits, and also to service providers who provide some of those services like Bitcoin mixing or cryptocurrency mixing that the whole ecosystem depends on. We've really seen reporting on ransomware increase significantly over the past 2 years. So I think we can really say the impact of those attacks has grown to pretty dangerous proportions recently. Although the data is somewhat noisy. I know that, for example, over the past year over year from 2020 to 2021, we saw about a 50% increase in reported ransomware attacks. Now, that could be because there's a lot more awareness out there. A lot more people are actually going to report it to our Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3, which is the primary source of our data. But really, that's kind of our best means and data set to track trends because it is the most comprehensive database out there, at least in the government, of ransomware reporting, and we do see a lot of people reporting into it. And like I said, really significant increase from 2020 to 2021 on that. As I said before, cyber criminals are opportunistic, and really most of them only care about profit. And they recognize that profit can be maximized, the more incentivized a victim is to actually provide payment. So we've seen a lot of them targeting those really critical services to society that can't afford the downtime of a ransomware attack. We're talking about hospitals, energy providers, emergency services, law enforcement, 911 dispatch, stuff like that, where disruptions could really cause a significant impact to society and the population is large. And one of the reasons that they do that is because they know that those types of targets are really incentivized to get back into action and are more likely to pay the ransom if they need to get back into action. So they're really in a difficult position if once they've reached the point of having fallen victim, because they have to choose between doing what we recommend and not pay the ransom, which again encourages them to continue victimizing other people and feeds back into investing in the cyber criminal infrastructure. But they have to choose between following our recommendation and actually providing vital services to the population. So it's a very difficult choice, and one that we hope that people can work ahead of time to not have to make. Now recently we've seen some purported ransomware developers discourage their affiliates from targeting critical infrastructure because they say it may draw additional scrutiny and attention, which we'll kind of get into some of the actions that results from a little later. But we've still seen a pervasive ransomware environment, so it's clear that to the extent that they're serious about this message, a lot of the affiliates and a lot of the actors out there are not listening to it. As I said, ransomware is becoming increasingly targeted against those targets that are most likely to pay and more lucrative as a result. And beyond the threat to critical infrastructure, it's become really one of the most costly and destructive threats to businesses and governments. Particularly during the pandemic, we've seen really callous opportunism in criminal groups by putting public safety at risk, as I said before, by attacking healthcare providers during a global pandemic. These are groups that they can't afford the downtime; they're already overwhelmed, and it's really kind of unconscionable to be targeting them at this time. But again, these actors are largely motivated by profit, and so we've seen them continue to do so. Another trend is we've seen them gain an increasing capacity for stealth over the past few years, and that's facilitated more persistent and comprehensive access to networks, particularly here in the United States. And unfortunately, these rapidly changing technical threats are going to increasingly challenge our investigations. And one of those areas I think we're looking at a new challenges on the horizon is probably over the next 5 years we're going to see some of the virtual asset innovations, blockchain technology, decentralized finance, central bank digital currencies. These types of things are going to create additional financial conduits that cyber criminals can take advantage of, and it's going to kind of degrade our insight into those financial flows a little bit as well. It will likely limit our ability to identify those illicit actors, track their funds, and compel the production of financial records, or even to use some of the existing laws that are on the books to prosecute their crimes. So that's something that we're really kind of have a focus on, in the next 5 years, and how we develop our operations to deal with that challenge. Now, what are we doing about the ransomware threat? Obviously, the entire U.S. government, as well as the cybersecurity ecosystem, is intently focused on taking measures against this threat on a variety of fronts. But the FBI, I think, plays a crucial role in that. If there's one thing that we understand, is how to take down criminal organizations. We've been doing it for over 100 years now. And when it comes to ransomware, we're really just working with an unprecedented number of partners and bringing them on the team to help us do that. We're really starting to see the impact of the FBI's cyber strategy in this realm, which builds on, as I said, a century of innovation, and is focused on imposing risk and consequences on our cyber adversaries, including ransomware actors. Our strategy for countering ransomware, like other complex cyber criminal threats, is focused on disrupting three things. First, we're just trying to disrupt the actors, identifying those key criminals and working with our international partners in a lot of cases to arrest them abroad, either where they live or where they travel. That means administrators and affiliates of ransomware groups, operators of services facilitating cybercrime like crypto tumblers, bulletproof hosting providers, and other service providers. And as an example of that, just recently we worked with Switzerland to extradite Vladislav Klyushin to the U.S. And in March, he appeared in a U.S. courtroom to be held to account for conducting ransomware attacks against multiple victims, including Kaseya, which I'm sure everybody on here is quite familiar with that incident. So the second thing we're targeting after the actors is their infrastructure. Anything we can seize or disable to disrupt their attacks, and also glean intelligence. You know, the criminal legal process is a powerful weapon for us to gain insight if we can get search warrants either here in the United States or through our foreign law enforcement partners on some of the servers and infrastructure that are doing this, as well as using subpoenas to illuminate the accounts and the connections between those accounts. As an example of that, we led an international operation against Emotet Botnet earlier this year, taking down a key facilitator of ransomware and other attacks. And finally, the third element that we're targeting is their money. I think everybody can understand why and how that is imposing consequence on these actors, given that that's their primary motivation. Our goal is to make crime less profitable and take away those funds that they are then using to run new illicit schemes and operations. Whenever we can, we're seizing cryptocurrency, as we did early last year in the NetWalker takedown, or last April when we arrested the operator of a cryptocurrency mixing service that laundered $355 million US dollars since 2015. Or November of last year, when we see $6.1 million in ransomware profits from an account in a cryptocurrency exchange that helped proceeds from several cyber attacks against U.S. victims using the Sodinokibi and Revel ransomware. And then again, in February of this year, we made the largest financial seizure in the Justice Department's history, seizing more than $3.6 billion in Bitcoin that was stolen from an exchange in 2016. We also arrested a New York couple who were charged with conspiracy to launder that Bitcoin. So each of these things, disrupting the actors, disrupting their infrastructure, taking their money, is crucial to the fight against ransomware. But we have the most durable impact when we disrupt all three of those together and not in isolation. And when we combine our capabilities as law enforcement and as well as an intelligence agency with the capabilities and authorities of our partners, whether that be other law enforcement agencies, other intelligence agencies, or crucially the private sector. At the same time, as all of that, we're targeting those three things not just for ransomware actors, but for other cyber criminal actors, because they exist in the same ecosystem and rely on a lot of the same services and infrastructures. While they didn't specifically target ransomware actors per se, law enforcement actions like the recent disruptions against raid forums and Hydra, both of which served as online marketplaces and clearinghouses for the sharing and sale of illicit goods and services, highlight the benefits of coordinated collaborative action by your law enforcement across the globe.
Well, let me jump in there. I mean, you hit on a lot of good things. Number one, coming fresh off a stint at CISA, I will tell you, getting to say 100 years of innovation is a great line. So every time you get a chance, use that one. Also, the hit them in the wallet, it works. And a lot of what you'll hear from private sector is when they come to government with the challenge of ransomware is who's hitting back, who's taking these guys and holding them to a cord. And so good to see that it's not just, somebody can't just come to America. They no longer can go to Disney World. That was the running tagline for a while. Now you're going after their infrastructure and you're doing things like that. What I'd like to shift to right now is to give you an opportunity to kind of do a victory lap around something we haven't seen the FBI do in a while. So this is almost defense for the greater good. And I'll let you elaborate on this, where the FBI went in to patch critical information and critical systems for a known vulnerability on systems they did not own. And so I wanted to kind of get your take on that, because being both government and private sector, we want to hear how these types of techniques can be employed.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. This is another key component of our cyber strategy, which is using every toolkit that we have available to us, including some of these sophisticated technical operations in sequenced, phased, joint enabled campaigns with every single partner that we can get to join along with us, be they private sector, international partners, or law enforcement partners. And I think a really good news story on that. In fact, I have a few examples of some of these things that I'd love to highlight. One of the most recent ones, just last month was, court authorized operation to remove botnet malware known as Cyclops Blink from a botnet that the Russian GRU had been building over the course of several years. As early as June of 2019, they began building this network that ultimately spanned the globe, and it implanted the malware on thousands of devices from WatchGuard technologies, which are typically deployed in small to mid-sized businesses. So again, the big players are not the only targets here. Everybody is affected by these things. So over several weeks, we went to WatchGuard, with this information and worked with them to kind of not only analyze the malware and how it worked, but also give them time to develop some detection tools and remediation techniques so that we could really publicize the actual solution to this instead of going at it piecemeal. So as we were going through that and analyzing the malware and working with WatchGuard on this remediation operation, we also determined the ability to do a technical operation and actually take down the botnet as well, which was important because while WatchGuard had several managed customers, a lot of their customers weren't managed by WatchGuard, and so they were reliant on them self-remediating. In the run-up to this technical operation back in February, again, partnering together with everybody we could, the FBI, CISA, and the UK's National Cybersecurity Center released an advisory identifying the Cyclops Blink malware as a replacement for the VPN filter malware that we exposed in 2018. And on that same day, WatchGuard released their detection and remediation tools for all their customers, as well as guidance for what to look out for and how to use it. And then we executed a little later this takedown, and were able to remove the command and control servers in this peer-to-peer botnet and remove the GRU's access to these thousands of devices worldwide before the botnet was actually placed into operation for whatever they intended to use it for, which I think everybody is well aware of the importance of removing a tool like that from the Russian government's hands at this particular time. A few other things that we've done. Earlier this month, we attributed cyber attacks as the U.S. government, and they were conducted in late February in conjunction with the further invasion of Ukraine against commercial SATCOM networks to Russian state-sponsored malicious cyber actors. Those attacks were meant to disrupt Ukrainian command and control during Russia's invasion of the country, but they also had spillover effects into other European countries. So in March, the CISA and the FBI warned about these threats to SATCOM network providers and customers before issuing an updated advisory this month in conjunction with that attribution to amplify and message regarding the U.S. government. But we've also been working with SATCOM providers here in the United States to identify what we can do to secure their technologies and services as well, so this sort of thing doesn't spill over here to affect the United States. And then, rolling back into March, we unsealed indictments following two separate criminal investigations involving Russian government actors. Most of this activity happened back in 2017 in the Dragonfly 2.0 campaign, which many of you may be familiar with, as well as the Triton malware that was fielded in a foreign petroleum refinery, really concerning malware focused against operational technologies. But we coordinate that with domestic and international partners and execute a whole of government effort to reveal the Russian computer network operations against the global energy sector, as again, this didn't just affect the United States, but it did specifically target us, our Western allies and foreign countries with whom Russia, importantly, has sought economic, military, or strategic alliances. So important to note there that they're even going after obstinable allies. we had, as I said, a bunch of sequenced actions occurring across the government and the private sector to further amplify those announcements. And importantly, we were working with a lot of the vendors for the affected technologies to make sure that they were broadcasting mitigation guidance to all of their customers as well for vulnerabilities that they had already luckily remediated. So that kind of, the several things that we've done to counter Russia. I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about China. We had a couple of really recent successes there as well. Last year, many of you are well aware of the widespread exploitation of vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange Server, where China compromised more than 10,000 U.S. networks. Moving quickly and quite frankly, irresponsibly to do so, prior to public disclosure of those vulnerabilities. So last July, in coordination with the State Department, other intelligence community agencies, and international partners, we unsealed 2 indictments against China-based hackers and joined our counterparts in denouncing the Chinese government's continued disregard of cyber norms. In conjunction with, again, another technical operation to remove the web shells that were installed using this vulnerability. So again, using every tool that we could in our toolbox to remove those accesses, both through partnerships with other government agencies and the private sector, but also through complex technical operations. And finally, in 2020, we became aware through our collection and also several private sector partners that certain U.S. companies operating in China were being targeted by malware installed in Chinese government-mandated tax software that they had to install as a condition of doing business in China to pay value-added tax there. So several U.S. companies discovered the malware was delivered into their networks through that software, and as a result of their good faith efforts to comply with Chinese law, they were rewarded with backdoors into their systems that could potentially steal their proprietary information. So, along with this incident, we issued 2 threat advisories to the private sector, providing not just FBI information and IC information, but also information that was sourced from the private sector, again, highlighting those public-private partnerships and the importance thereof. And after the first advisory went out, we engaged with victims and entities that were affected by this, received greater understanding of the threat through that engagement and from the information the private sector gave back to us, and then issued a subsequent advisory kind of updating some of our conclusions based on that engagement and what we learned from the private sector. The information we were able to share was enhanced and really offered a lot more granularity to our partners as a result, and sparked really important conversations and discussions there and ongoing partnerships.
So talking about partnerships, a lot of the feel outside of government is that government knows threat information that they either it's too classified to share or it's just really hard to get out, that there's this ongoing battle on information sharing. Like, how does the government get threats in the hands of private sector who has kind of this transparency knowledge of where those outcomes may come and crescend? Like, how do we work with your group to make sure that it's not just a feed, like private sector giving you information to make sure you have your product? Has it work both ways? And I know after you explain this, I think it's a great opportunity to get you to kind of give a threat briefing on where you're seeing things, especially when we're talking about China, Russia, and others.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first to address that question, I mean, information sharing is a difficult thing. As I'm sure you well realize from your time in CISA, as well as most of the people here, it's hard to know what exactly to share, and it needs to be a two-way flow, but neither of those two parties, the public sector or the private sector, can completely share everything that we have for a variety of reasons. The private sector, clearly has a ton of proprietary information, private information about their employees, customers, et cetera, that they don't want to give the government full access to for good reason. Likewise, we have information that we can't share just completely openly with the private sector, a lot of which is coming from intelligence community partners, from partners who are sharing based on, some expectation of privacy, gathered through classified sources and methods. So just completely opening the kimono on both sides is not really the answer. I think what the answer is those relationships. And I've seen a lot of success in just getting the ongoing conversations started about what are you seeing, what are we seeing, and then kind of play off of each other's concerns and what we're seeing. Like when we're talking to you in the private sector, for example, about what you're seeing on your networks, the things that are targeting you, that's going to prompt not just issues that we want to ask more about to gain greater clarity on what you're seeing, but it's also going to prompt, us to know what we should be searching our holdings for, to identify that information that's going to be specifically useful to you. So this can happen in a bilateral means. I absolutely, encourage everybody out there in the private sector to learn and make friends with your cyber squads in your local field office and have these ongoing communications and have a really low threshold for just calling us up and saying, hey, we're seeing something anomalous. Is this something we should worry about? And oftentimes we can run some checks and kind of go from there. We may say, hey, it looks like it's just anomalous, but we may really ping on something that's important, and we can, in those situations, can identify a potential intrusion as early as possible and limit the damage really effectively if you're calling us early. But the other thing I want to highlight is the success of the multilateral fora. I know CISA has JCDC, we have NCFTA and NDCA. NSA has done a really great job. Obviously, NSA, in past years was very tight on their information, but they've done a really good job in past years of opening up a lot and standing up their cybersecurity collaboration center. So these type of fora are really valuable because it's not just the government talking to the private sector and like, hey, what have you got? I don't know, what have you got? Then you can have those lateral communications as well among the infrastructure sectors where you can say like, hey, I'm seeing this, you fellow private sector person, what are you seeing? And then that kind of prompts the discussion. And if the government's in the room, then that helps us identify what's important.
Well, before we jump into letting you kind of scare us all to death about what you know about coming threats, one of the challenges we have, and I'll point to a question that's in the chat right now, is that law enforcement is seen almost as reactive. When you have a ransomware incident or something to report, there's a logical way to talk to that field agent, and just a foot stomp here, always have your relationship with your cyber government leads in advance, not after, but always reach out. How best can we work with your group, the agency, the Bureau, to try and get a proactive approach to this, and where we are leaning in the private sector in partnership with you? And is there any, you mentioned fora, is there any particular contact info you'd like to put out right now for our groups to really point towards?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I definitely understand why we're seen as reactive, and just like law enforcement has been for decades or even centuries, as well as intelligence communities. There's a lot of what we're doing that is under is behind the curtain, and you may not necessarily see. So I know in a lot of these outreaches, I've even heard complaints about like, hey, I was a victim of this ransomware or of this business email compromise, and they didn't open a case on my incident. Why are you not opening cases on all of these? So I do kind of want to talk about how we look at this. There are just too many ransomware incidents out there, business email compromise incidents out there to work them in isolation. So what we're doing, and we've done this on the national security side for years now, which will provide a good segue into the national security threats in just a second. But we've also done this for several years on the criminal side, where we're working these threats as criminal organizations and not just as isolated incidents. So if you're victimized by Sodinokibi ransomware, we're not going to necessarily open a case into your XYZ company's ransomware attack. But what we are doing is feeding all that information into the broader investigation into the Sodinokibi ransomware actors, and building the case against them, and then working, largely through those, joint-enabled campaigns that I discussed to try to impose those risks and consequences on them. File, in many cases, sealed legal process against the actors so we can snatch them up when they travel, take down their infrastructure and take their money. So that's the way we have the biggest impact, and we are working as proactively as we can to do that. But I absolutely understand the frustration on the people who are on the front lines who are getting attacked every day. You're not necessarily going to hear that a case was opened into you. I would say, my recommendation for anybody who wants to kind of help out with that is your first step is to contact your local FBI field office. That's one of our real strengths in the FBI is we're not a DC-based organization. As we say here at headquarters, the real work is done out in the field. So I'm just here talking to cameras all day. I'm actually doing other stuff, but the real work is actually happening out there in the field. And their job out there is not just to engage in these complex long-term investigations, but is also to work with you in the private sector and build those partnerships where you sit, so that they know you know them, and that you can have those ongoing conversations. And as I said, that way you have that level of comfort that it's not a big deal if you just call up Joe Smith, the cyber supervisor in your local city, and say, like, hey Joe, this is probably a waste of your time, but I'm seeing this on my network. You should have a level of comfort where you can and do that sort of thing. Circling back to the broader, more complex operations, there's definitely a role for the private sector, particularly on the cyber criminal side, to do that. I'd say in the FBI, our National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, in Pittsburgh, but also in New York and Los Angeles, is a really great forum where we're bringing a lot of private sector experts together for fellowships to work on some of these problems and really take a hack at the big picture cyber criminal organizations instead of just kind of working at the margins. So if you are somebody who is in the cybersecurity industry or has a really strong cybersecurity team in your organization and would like to be a part of that, then I think that's a good avenue to explore. And then again, I want to put a plug out for the JCDC that they're doing a lot of that type of partnership and building those communities of action in the critical infrastructure sectors, and the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center for the defense industrial base primarily. Those are all three great fora to do that. But from my perspective, the biggest bang for your buck is making that call and building that relationship with your FBI field office, and express your interest in other stuff you're interested in, and they can help guide you from there.
Well, we're running up on about 6 minutes left, and what I wanted to do is I've got my eye on the questions over here, and part of what they're talking about is our last topic, which is how do we get a picture of where these state actors are trying to make inroads on us from a criminality standpoint. And two of the questions tie into this. Number one, how are we doing better, or is there something around attribution that can be amplified to get better progress on knowing who that actor is? And an earlier question was around supply chain and data security, some of the economic security aspect that overlays with cyber. So let me just give you the floor to close us out with that, with your views on some of these state actors, especially hitting on China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea and the like.
Right. Yeah. So great points there. Could you remind me of that first question again? I'm sorry.
The first question is regarding attribution for those state actors. So as you go through kind of identifying some of your things, if you can kind of give us a paint a picture on attribution as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to briefly hit on attribution, it is very important to us for a variety of reasons. I think the big reason, well, actually there's two really big reasons. One is that allows us to figure out what information we have in our holdings is going to be able to help you in the private sector. If we can quickly attribute activity or an attack against your organization, that allows us to reach back into our insights, into our known indicators of compromise, our known TTPs, and get the experts that are working that threat to help you out and give you more particularized recommendations about what you should be doing and what you should be looking for. The other part of that as well is as part of our imposing risk and consequence. One role of that, of course, is publicly attributing attacks, which we've done with great success, I think, over the past few years, to call out irresponsible behavior on the part of some of the nation-state actors that I'll go into, as well as identifying even particular individuals that we can hold accountable through sanctions and through criminal legal process and other means. So, for that said, I'll kind of segue into briefly hitting on some of the major nation-state actors. First, China. I think that's our biggest long-term threat that we're looking at. It's a prolific and effective cyber espionage threat, possesses substantial cyber attack capabilities, and presents a growing threat of malign foreign influence. They have the capability to launch cyber attacks that, at a minimum, can cause localized temporary disruptions to critical infrastructure within the United States, and they continue to aggressively conduct cyber operations to gather foreign intelligence, policy information, and sensitive business, commercial, and proprietary information from U.S. companies, research entities, law firms, media companies, and U.S. officials. And I kind of already talked about the Microsoft Exchange server and the tax software as two great examples of some of their operations. Now, moving on to Russia, we assess that Russia is going to remain another top-tier cyber threat as it refines and employs its espionage, influence, and attack capabilities. They continue to target critical infrastructure in the United States and in allied and partner countries. Compromising such infrastructure can improve and in some cases can demonstrate its ability to damage infrastructure during a crisis. And as we just heard about some of the ways they're employing that in Ukraine. There are a couple of things we're particularly focused on when it comes to Russia. One is their history of using poorly controlled, damaging attacks that spread beyond their intended targets. The SATCOM incident that I talked about back in February is one example of that. Another really great example of that is back in 2017, the NotPetya malware attack, when they infected Ukrainian accounting software with malware that presented as ransomware, but had no ability to pay a ransom or recover the data. So it was really a data destruction attack. It was targeted at Ukraine, but it escaped and went global, causing billions of dollars in damages around the world. So that's why we investigate not only what Russia's up to here, but also abroad. Another point on Russia is the difficulty of determining the intent from the type of intrusion we see. They have widespread accesses, and those could be used to enable data exfiltration, but could also allow data destruction attacks and other means of shutting entities down. So that's why we have a low threshold for action, particularly as it applies to Russia. And finally, we remain concerned that Russian cyber criminals will target U.S. critical infrastructure with ransomware attacks, either in support of the Russian government in a time of crisis such as we're in right now, or to take advantage of an even more permissive operating environment in Russia right now. So that's why we're focused on the whole gamut of the threat emanating from Russia, both the Russian intelligence services and the cyber criminal groups, because there are those ties. And circling back to the attribution, that's one thing that the additional insight we can gain from the private sector is really important if we can start to identify more of those ties between cyber criminals and Russian intelligence services. So Iran, I'll briefly touch on them. They're also one of our top cyber threats that we're looking at. Their growing expertise and willingness to conduct aggressive cyber operations make it a significant threat to the security of the U.S. and allied networks and data, and they have the ability to conduct attacks on critical infrastructure, as well as to conduct influence and espionage activities. One thing that I want to mention with Iran is many of you may have seen the indictments that we publicized about their actions interfering with the 2020 presidential elections, which really goes to show that they're expanding their scope beyond espionage and attack capabilities into that influence capabilities, and had a relatively sophisticated and multi-dimensional plan for doing so. So finally, North Korea. North Korea's cyber program is a growing espionage, theft, and attack threat, whose capabilities have increased in recent years. They probably have the expertise to cause temporary and limited disruptions in some critical infrastructure networks. But one of the things that they've really been doing recently is a lot of financial theft, which is fairly unique for a state-sponsored organization. They have a lot of close ties, again, with cyber criminal organizations, which they tap into to obscure their operations, but also to tap into some of those enabling capabilities in the cyber theft ecosystem that they can use to enhance their efforts. And we have unsealed some indictments and some operations against them as well. In particular, last year, an indictment against 3 hackers linked to a majority of North Korea's publicly known financial heists, alongside CISA and the Treasury Department. We issued a joint cybersecurity advisory and called out their malign actions as well. So I know I've run a little long, so I apologize for that. But
I appreciate it, and thank you so much. One, we're glad you're in the seat, so keep it up, keep up the great work. This has been a great session, and I know all of our partners are really taking in all of the goodness that you have to offer in this conversation.
All right. Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to get in front of this group. We really want to spread the message about not just the threat out there, but the importance of all of us partnering together, and the FBI, being a big proponent of that, and really wanting to be involved in it. So if there's one thing I could leave the group with, it's cyber threats and attacks of our times have become increasingly larger and bolder, and demand concerted and sustained efforts from all of us. We know we can't stop every cyber attack, and we certainly can't work alone as one agency or as one company, but working together, we can minimize these risks and threats. And we want all corporations to think about viewing the FBI as an indispensable ally in this fight for our collective security. Now more than ever, we need each other, and this is the only way to get ahead of those threats, working together.
Thanks again, Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, Microsoft's Kelly Bissell and I were kind of going back and forth on LinkedIn as we were listening to these comments, which have been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much, just in terms of how valuable it is to understand how the FBI is seeing these things. And I think that threat briefing he gave at the end really sunk in with me on a couple of levels, Matt, that the FBI has a low threshold for action in Russia, really because they're not always sure what the intention is. They know that they have the access. They don't know why they're there. So there were a number of points that I thought were really well worth listening to, and we want to thank him again for his time.
Yeah, and when you hear NotPetya, and that's just how fast those things scale out of the box. And so good to see that they're taking every threat seriously.
Yeah, absolutely right.